This week's guest is Art O'Connor. Art is a strength coach, and more specifically, a strength coach for cyclists. He currently works with some very high-level gravel and mountain bike riders, such as Keegan Swenson and Alex Wild. Throughout the episode, we talk about fitting in strength work to an already insane aerobic training schedule, meeting athletes where they're at physically, and the benefits endurance athletes can see by incorporating strength work into their training regimen. As always, thank you for listening and enjoy the episode.
Before we hit the intro music, I wanted to introduce to you guys the Yoakum Strength Insider. The Yoakum Strength Insider is our online training platform that takes all of the ideas that we talk about on this podcast and implements them into a program that is available to you at the touch of your fingers. Our goal with the Yoakum Strength Insider is to create better movers, to level up your life, and to move forward from where you are. We do this in a holistic fashion. Not only will you receive a program that has helped hundreds of people become better movers, you'll also receive access to our app that allows you to track everything, has video links for all exercises, and allows you to be in constant communication with a Yoakum Strength coach. Along with this, you'll get our 30-page PDF nutrition and lifestyle guidelines. That includes everything from what to eat, how much of it to eat, why we're eating it, meditation habits, and other lifestyle habits that we implement with our clients to really level up their lives. If you're interested in trying out one of these programs, use podcast 25 in the discount section right before you pay for 25% off your first program. Boom.
This is the Yoakum Strength Podcast. Take the leap down the rabbit hole with us as we interview elite level guests to unravel what high performance really is.
All right, well, Coach, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have you here.
Thanks, Austin. I'm really happy to be here as well.
Yeah, I just Tristan sent me a podcast that you were just on. Tristan, whose podcast is that? It had a lot of views. I don't really know who the guy is though. Is that a big cyclist guy?
Yeah, it's a pretty big cyclist dude who has interviewed a ton of athletes, coaches, and like high performance people in like the endurance and cycling space. I mean, Art can probably tell you a little bit more about him. And I just followed him, and I had known some of these guys that Art works with do strength training and are pretty proficient in it, but I never actually knew who their strength coach was. And I saw that it was him, and I was like, oh man, like let's reach out to him and see if he wants to come on because it'd be a great conversation.
Yeah, and I was geeking out over this podcast because, like, I mean, we were about 1 minute into the podcast when you dropped the line of, like, show me a sport where being weaker is better, and I'll go play that sport. Dude, I just bursted out laughing. But I want to kind of know and dive into kind of your brain and thoughts around this because, dude, it's not only trickling. Like, I feel like it's been, unfortunately, decently common in a sport that it's, like, the people don't look jacked, right? Like American football, people look jacked. So like, even if they're not doing strength training for the right purposes or reasons, it's just like kind of the culture around it. Whereas you get into more endurance sports, it's like, I work with a lot of ultra guys in our gym and we call it the JST Run Club, like a bunch of psychopaths doing ultras. Every single one of them, once they've started strength training, have talked about how much better their ultras are and how much better they feel and on their runs. And you would think like two just totally different physiological kind of states, but it's like, yeah, you show me a sport where we're being weaker is better, and like kind of having the same conversations with them. And once you get them to like understand that and drink it, they're like full board, and then they get the results from that. But this kind of thought process is like trickling in. I mean, baseball is one that I'm seeing it in. My buddy, not my buddy, my athlete, he's like a senior in high school right now. He sent me a picture of his baseball team, and their record is not good. He is the only one on the team that trains, and he is not a big guy. And he looks huge in this photo because he just strength trains twice a week. And I was like,
Yeah.
I told him, I'm like, dude, what am I looking at? That's a high school baseball team. You are the biggest guy on the team at 160 pounds. Like it blew my mind. But anyway, sorry. It's just a lot of rants going on right now about that. But I would love to know kind of your thought processes on why kind of the culture around strength training in these fields is not as good, and how you went about trying to fix it and like actively approaching it and like getting people to believe in what you believe in and not going through that whole, oh, it's just what meatheads do.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's fun. I think a lot of it is particularly older sports, there's just such a traditional way of doing things. And there's a lot of resistance to change. Certainly baseball players have achieved some really amazing results with not having a lot of strength training, to go back to your baseball example. But but also they've had some really great results by doing a lot of strength training. I mean, like I'm old enough to remember when, Mark McGuire and Barry Bonds were battling each other for the home run title, and those dudes are freaking jacked. So it's amazing to me that it hasn't really taken off in baseball to the extent that it probably should, just based on the results of those two guys. But endurance sports in general have been very, very resistant to strength training because it is a strength to weight type of sport. Like you want to be as light and as you can be because you have to carry that mass up a hill in cycling. Um, but I kind of approached it like I've been strength training since I was in eighth grade. I mean, you can look at me. I'm not a naturally big guy. I'm pretty skinny and always have been. But I got introduced to strength training by a ski coach when I was in eighth grade, and he was kind of a legendary figure in New England skiing. All of his boys were on the U.S. ski team, and he was an old school barbell guy. So I kind of got the strength training bug early. I was a really skinny kid. And like a lot of really skinny kids, I wanted to be big and jacked. So, so I hit the weight room with a vengeance, and I never got big and jacked, but I got really strong for my size. Um, and I attributed that to whatever success I had as an athlete was just to the fact that I was stronger than most of my competitors. I may not have been as skilled or as talented, but I was physically strong. So it got me to a lot of places. I skied at a pretty high level in high school and had dreams of going to college as a skier, but when I got to college, I realized that wasn't going to happen. So I ended up walking onto the track team at the University of Utah and had a Division I track and field career and continued my strength training there, and then smoothly transitioned into cycling and became a professional there. But all of that I kind of attributed to just being strong. Like as a cyclist, I'm considered a big person because I'm 6'7", and when I was racing professionally, I was about 185 pounds. So
Giant on
not a
that bike.
bit. Yeah, if I was in the NBA, I'd be getting pushed around at that height and weight. But as a cyclist, I was an absolute giant. And I always thought like, well, I'm bigger than these guys. I have to be stronger than them to get up and over these climbs and get up over the mountains to do so. So I continued my strength training through my cycling career, and I've always coached people from college on. I got my degree in exercise physiology, so I've always coached people on the side. But I've had like a whole career in finance and things like that. But even during that, I coached people. And in 2010, 2011, I was pretty burned out on the corporate world and just asking myself some hard life questions of what brings me joy and how do I want to spend the rest of my life? Because I certainly don't want to spend it in this cubicle. And I thought back to the gym, and I was still, I still ride and race, in the old man categories now. But I really thought, the gym was kind of the fundamental thing for me. And if I can get endurance cyclists and cyclists in general to get on board with this, even if I get one or two people, that would be a win for me. And so I quit my job, uh, went all in to become a full-time strength coach. And I'd had CSCS certifications that I'd carried and let lapse over the years. And I'm based in Salt Lake City, and there's a kind of a legendary, infamous gym here called Jim Jones. And I went through their whole process, their certification process, just to kind of get my chops back up. Because even though I've always kind of, kept a toe in that world, I really wanted to dig deep into the strength side of things. I knew how to train people to ride bikes really well at that point, but other than my own strength training, I hadn't really coached anybody in strength training. So went through the whole Jim Jones process. I was one of their first 20 certified instructors, and then that whole thing kind of went away for a number of different reasons. And I kind of hung out my own shingle and started training at a local gym here and was really beating my head against the wall to get cyclists in. I did pretty well with like getting weight loss and just general fitness people. And then right before the summer before the Rio Olympics, there's a really famous mountain biker named Nino Schurter. He's considered the greatest of all time. He's won world championships like 10 times, the World Cup overall 7 or 8 times. The goat of our sport. He released a video of him doing these insane gym workouts the summer before the Rio Olympics. It was I can't remember what the name of the series was called, but it was just journaling, documenting his journey to the Olympics. And like almost overnight, I started getting phone calls from local cyclists that that had been haranguing to come to the gym. They saw this video and they started, and then that kind of snowballed, and I started working with some of the pros at the local level and a lot of high school teams as well. And then I, started working with Keegan Swenson, who I've known of Keegan since he was, 8 years old. He used to race a little bit with his dad. His dad and his mom were kind of fixtures of the local cycling and cyclocross scene. And Keegan was a young up and comer. Started working with him, and for those who don't, Keegan is kind of the guy in American gravel off-road racing right now, gravel and mountain bike. He's won the Lifetime Grand Prix, which is the premier series in America, 3 times in a row now. He just won the opening round of this season, so literally nobody's ever led that series other than him. And he kind of legitimized what I was doing because he started really talking about strength training, and other pros kind of started working with me from there. But I always go back to strength as kind of the fundamental for success in any athletic field. Going back to my pithy quote of, show me a sport that weaker is better. There isn't one that I know of.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So you talked about getting them initially and kind of, Nino Schurter posting it, and that it feels like sometimes in an industry like strength and conditioning, all it takes is that one person who is a figurehead to show like, hey, I'm doing this, and then all of a sudden it catches a lot of notoriety. Usually I feel like it's for the negative, but in this case it was for the positive. Um, how do you balance working with these athletes as a strength coach? And then obviously they have usually a different coach programming their endurance stuff. Is it something that you have deep conversations with their endurance coach, or you just kind of have an intuitive sense of what works and why?
Yeah, I mean, I don't talk with I offer to speak to their coaches because I want to be transparent and open, and I also don't want them to think that I'm trying to steal them as an on-bike coaching client, because I'm not. I don't like writing on bike programs. I really just like the strength stuff. So some of them talk to me, some of them don't really. They kind of, especially at this point, my reputation kind of precedes me a little bit. So I think a lot of them were just like, all right, he knows what he's doing. But I do like having those conversations, and I do look at. Training Peaks is a big software in the endurance world. So every single professional cyclist, their workouts are in their Training Peaks. Their riding coach puts it up there. I put my strength training in there, but I can see what their upcoming week of training looks like and kind of tailor their training based on how much volume they have that week, how much intensity, and if they have a race upcoming on the weekend. So I'm going in there every Sunday night and looking at their coming week. Sometimes I do talk to their coaches, but it's mostly just looking at Training Peaks and figuring out what their week's going to look like, and then talking to them, of course.
And what do those like adjustments look like? Like, how do you balance? Because this is the thing that I'm seeing. Like, it's almost like again, it's the pendulum swing in strength conditioning that I talk about all the time, but it's like before it was just like this meathead approach of just more work, always work harder, just grind, and kind of just running people underground. And this is probably like when I first got into strength conditioning, it was probably too far on that setting. And it seems like we've kind of swung a little bit into the pendulum of anytime there is a recovery issue or somebody doesn't feel good, or like, I mean, which is crazy because like the whole principle of strength conditioning and performance is you're going to stress the body, and that stress is going to force an adaptation, but that stress is also going to force fatigue and feel, and like, so now anytime there's fatigue, anytime there is an issue, anytime there's going to be like, it's all an adjustment to where they're pulling stuff out of their strength program. And this is one of the biggest faults that I'm seeing, especially in the high school world and college world. It's like we're almost taking that pro model where guys are the one percenters of the one percenters. They already have this massive base. They already have like these massive strength qualities, speed reserves, power reserves built up. And they're okay with being able to take a couple days off or a week off or just pulling back and fluctuating there. And now it's like these high school kids are doing that, and then their solution is, okay, I'm feeling a little bit sore from practice. I'm not strength training this week. And it's like, dude, like that's not how that works. Like that's also to me, it's also like a little bit, especially in the high school world where it's like in the untrained world, that like the intermediate to lower intermediate level, it's like that's just not holding your recovery aspects to standard, right? Like instead of holding
Mhm.
yourself accountable to the recovery stuff, you just counter that by taking away things in the strength training world or taking away things into practice field. So how do you practice or balance the product of okay, they do have a heavy week or they are feeling beat up with we still do need to get the strength training done because it seems like strength training is the first thing cut from almost any program. And this is even in team sports. It's not even in
Yeah.
the endurance world where I'm sure it's even like that's the first thing they'll cut even quicker.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the thing I notice is my professionals generally never cut their strength training.
Every time. It's so funny, dude. It's like
Yeah.
the better they are, oh my God, that's yes. And then the worse they are, the more they want to cut.
Yeah, and so I struggle with this with my high school athletes in that they have, they have their team practices and they have, the events that they're going to, and they're always like, I need to not strength train this week because I've got this, and this. I'm like, well, no, you would get more from doing, the 45 minutes of strength training than you are by getting an extra 45 minutes on the bike at this point. And that's across, that's not just cycling. Like that's in the gym that I train out of. One of the other coaches there works a lot with soccer players. And same thing there, like all they're doing is playing soccer. And if they'd take that 2 hours a week off the field and get in the gym, I think their injury rates would go down because they're not taking any time to like make themselves more durable or in better shape frankly, because all they're doing is skills and drills and scrimmages. And it's kind of the same thing in cycling too. Um, so I have that conversation all the time with my high school athletes and my amateur athletes. And, for a master's guy, a guy that's like 40 years old and, has a family and a job and things like that. Yeah, probably it makes sense to, something's got to get cut out if he wants to spend time with his family or focus on his career. But, I think it's a huge disservice for younger athletes to skip their strength and conditioning work. Um, the last thing kind of they need are more skills and drills in my opinion. Like spend some time working on the chassis and getting yourself strong, getting yourself durable.
Yeah, and the one of my main principles that I've kind of switched over to in the past 5 years when I was really thinking about like what matters in sports performance is like looking at where the low-hanging fruit is for these athletes. Because coming from the American football world, I think I got stuck in only seeing American football guys for the first couple like 3 or 4 years of strength conditioning. And you know what they needed more of actually is more field time, more skill work, more
Yeah.
like catching the ball and doing things because they were all the only thing they spent 14 hours a week in the weight room and 1 hour a week on the field. And I was like, okay, like with these guys, we need to get them on the field more. They need to be doing more athletic things. They need to be catching the ball. And then I was working with every other sport, and every other sport is almost the exact opposite. And I was like, oh my God, with these guys, like I need to bring them into the weight room and they need to spend more time there. And it's like the low-hanging fruit principle of like going from shit to suck at something is going to take such a low level investment and it's going to give you such a bigger return on investment than going from like good to great at something. And I just felt like a lot of football guys were going from good to great in the weight room. And to
Mhm.
me, the only thing I felt like they needed to go good to great from, and the thing that mattered was on the like they needed to go from good to great of being an American football player, right? And I felt like they were so shit to suck in the skill technical aspect on the field. And once you started to get them from to the suck point or maybe suck to good, and then they were able to use their goodness that they had in the weight room, all of it like their abilities skyrocketed. And now I reverse that with I'm really thinking of all these ultra runners that I work with in the gym. It's you take them from just absolute dog water in the gym to just
Mhm.
like pretty average in the gym, and they're like everything is magic. I feel amazing. This is awesome. I'm so much stronger. I'm so much faster. And it was like, dude, we didn't do anything. Like
Right.
you literally like you're training hard, but like the weights you're using are not crazy for any amount of standard because you're an ultra runner. You're like
Mhm.
140 pounds, and that's okay. Like I'm not faulting that at all. It's just like none of it's
Right.
magic or any like sauce that we're doing. It's just going from something you're absolutely dog water at that is a rate limiting factor in your sport to getting decent at it, and then all the things that you were already good at allow you, like, it eliminates the, again, those rate limiting factors, so you can go from good to great in the thing you need to go from good to great from, instead of just running your face into the wall, which I feel like a lot of sports do. But to me, the way that I simplify it is like, what is your low hanging fruit, and what are the things that you're really, really not spending the time on that do end up being your rate limiting factors. And if you just spend, like you said, 45 minutes twice a week, like, you're going to notice a massive improvement on that, rather than 45 more minutes at the thing that you're already spending 14 hours on a week.
Right. Right. And that's the challenge in endurance sports is getting the buy-in from the athlete that this is going to benefit you. And also kind of setting the expectation that there's such a thing as strong enough. I'm a big believer in that. Like, I wish it was as simple as like, all right, if you can deadlift 500 pounds, you're going to be able to climb at 6 watts per kilo and win a grand tour. Like, that would make my job super easy. And we'd have a lot of jack dudes out there winning bike races. But but to your point, like being strong in the weight room doesn't necessarily make you, you know, greater at your sport to a point. Like, there's some baseline standards for every sport. Every sport probably has them, where you should be able to deadlift this much or squat this much to be competent for your sport. And that's the challenge in any sport is like, what is strong enough? And at what point do we cross that threshold of like, all right, I've got a 2 times body weight deadlift. Do I really need 3 times body weight to be better at my sport? Probably not. And probably to get to that 3 times body weight, you're going to have to cut out your sport and spend more time in the gym getting stronger at deadlifting. So like I tell my athletes, we don't chase numbers in the gym because, yeah, telling another bike racer that you can, deadlift 300 pounds is probably going to impress another bike racer, but to an actual strength sport athlete, like that's what they warm up with that, they're not, you're not impressing anybody with that number. Um, it's not to say it's good to have standards and have challenges out there, but like I don't test 1 rep maxes with my athletes ever. I'm sure a lot of them do it on their own, but like when I'm there, I don't test 1 rep maxes. We estimate based on a 3 or a 5 rep test because for my purposes with endurance athletes, I don't need to know to the pound what their max deadlift is. If we're in the ballpark, I can program based on that and get them to where they need to be in their sport.
So for a few of the people who probably don't understand like what some of these professional endurance athletes do, could you kind of walk through what their typical week is and like actually how much training volume occurs? Because I think it's pretty mind-bending when people hear those numbers. Like almost how you said a 300-pound deadlift doesn't sound strong to any strength athlete. I think the amount of time these average professionals like Keegan and some of the pro mountain bikers you work with who do like Cape Epic train is going to be pretty astounding. And then also how you fit in the weights with that, like because there's a few different methodologies of like stacking your hard days with weights, so your easy days are easier. But
Mhm.
sometimes they almost have like all their days are pretty hard, and so where do you find the time, and how do you actually fit that into their training day, like before or after, or where that goes?
Yeah, so yeah, for some context for the for people that don't follow cycling, like a professional gravel racer in America right now, just to be competitive, is training 20 plus hours a week pretty consistently.
On the bike,
Guys like
right?
on the bike, that's
Yeah.
just their bike training. Yeah.
Crazy.
Um, guys like Keegan and Russell Finsterwald, Alex Wild, they're doing, 30 plus hours a week and sometimes 40 hours before like Unbound is the biggest race in America. It's a 200-mile gravel race. It takes the winners about 9 plus hours to do it. So you have to train at that volume to do that. So they're doing really big blocks right now in anticipation of that race, but they're still doing I've got 2 athletes right now. They're doing an altitude training camp preparing for this, and they're doing 2 days a week in the gym. They're pretty easy, like short and to the point days in the gym. Like they're doing like a 3 by 3 at like 70% for like a deadlift, for example, on one day. And then the Thursday session, if they trained on a Monday or Tuesday, is going to be more of a power base. So really light, really explosive type work. But they're in and out of the gym in under 30 minutes during this phase. In the preseason, where their volume is actually probably their highest. They're doing it, 2 days a week of an hour plus, sometimes 3 days a week. Some of my athletes like the gym more than others and want 3 days in the off season. But during the season, they do stack they make their hard days hard. So like they're doing their gym work on the day that they're doing their interval training. Um, their days are kind of always hard, as Tristan kind of mentioned, because just the volume that they're doing, like even like an endurance day for these guys, in some cases might be a 7 hour ride. There's nothing easy about that, even if you're going easy. That's a lot of volume to absorb and a lot of calories that you have to ingest just to stay on top of things. So self-care for these athletes is huge. Like they put as much thought into what they're going to do off the bike to absorb the training that they did on the bike or in the gym as they do in planning their actual training. The best athletes, and I've found this across multiple sports, they've set up their life in such a way that there are no barriers for them. Like, you know, they lay out their kit the night before so they can just get up, get dressed, and go out and train. They do their food prep. They don't miss, they have systems in place for everything so that the cognitive load is really low and everything's just a process. Like, I get up, I eat this many calories, I foam roll, I do my stretching, I get on my bike. I'm going to have this many calories each hour during the ride. I'm going to finish, put on like some compression boots or get a massage. Then I'm going to go to the gym. Then I'm going to have my evening meal. I'm going to stretch. I'm going to go to bed and repeat. Everything is systemized for the best people. That's the biggest thing I notice with the top athletes is nothing's left to chance. There's no like figuring it out as you go. Like everything's accounted for and planned for.
And when you're working with these cyclists that have these like 7 hour days and it's kind of a crazy workload, especially in the off season, what do your like weight room days kind of look like? I know you said the 3x3 deadlifts in like in season, but like what's a typical kind of day look like? What are the things that you're trying to hit with them? Are you implementing any like jumps, sprints, like that type of work? Like, is it accessory work? I know you said something really cool about how a lot of times legs aren't the limiting factor and you're going to do a lot of core and upper body type stuff with these cyclists, which I feel like, I think a lot of times would be counterintuitive when you're working with a cyclist where a lot of people would be like, okay, we're just going to build up your legs. Like what's kind of your philosophies and approaches and what's a day look like just practically when you're working with these athletes?
Yeah, so they're full body workouts for sure because riding a bike is a full like requires input from the entire body. So every session with my athletes, they're going to do like off season anyway, they're going to do some kind of bilateral strength, like squat or a deadlift. Then they're going to do some kind of single leg work, like step ups or split squats or kind of favorites, reverse lunges, things like that. And I'll usually within the same workout make one more of a strength, like pure strength move, and that's usually the bilateral. So we'll do heavy squats or heavy deadlifts, and a lot of times I'll combine box jumps with that. So they'll do like 4 reps at like 80% of a deadlift, and then go do 3 box jumps immediately after their last rep, and then they'll rest for 2 to 3 minutes. Do that for 4 or 5 rounds. And then their single leg work is going to be lighter and more on the explosive side. Because the thing that most endurance athletes are lacking is, they can't really access their fast twitch muscle fibers the way a power or a strength athlete does. We're so slow twitch and so, planning for like these all day events. But cycling is a power-based sport. It's power that wins races. It's your ability to attack or sprint and to create a separation. And sometimes you have to do that, 4, 5, 6 times within a race before you get that gap. And, or a lot of times the race will come down to a sprint. You'll have a group in gravel races, 6 to, I think last year there were 15 people sprinting for the finish at Unbound. So at the end of a 9 hour event, now all of a sudden you have to generate 1,500 watts for 10 to 20 seconds to win the race. that's a big ask, and it's not something that's going to come natural if you don't spend your time working on your ability to recruit those fast twitch muscle fibers.
When you're working with these athletes, one of the things that I know I got, especially early on with ultra people and distance runners, is the fear of putting on too much size.
Right.
What's your counter argument to these to these kids and these athletes when they talk about not wanting to get too big for their sport?
Yeah, well, if they're doing what they should be doing within their sport, I mean, you and I both know that like putting on size is not something that happens by accident.
Yeah.
If it's muscle, it's like you have to eat like it's your full-time job to put on a bunch of muscle. And if you're training 20 plus hours on a week on a bike, I'm sorry, but you're not going to put on like 10 pounds of muscle in a season. It's just not going to happen. But that said, almost all of the pros that I work with have put on, you know, 2 to maybe 3 kilos of muscle over the course of like a couple of seasons working with me. But in every single case, their power at threshold has gone up. So yeah, they are a little bit heavier, but they're putting out more power and they're able to, so it's mitigating that weight gain. It's functional muscle mass that's carrying them up the hill or across the field or whatever it is. So
Uh,
it's
One thing that I noticed, and you talked about doing the upper body stuff too, is that a lot of people don't think cycling is upper body, but especially in some of these like gravel and mountain bike races. I know if I go mountain biking with some friends or I haven't mountain biked in a while, one of the first things to go is just like your shoulders, your hands, your forearms, and all that. And people I think don't put enough emphasis on once that goes, how useless everything else is in your body. And it becomes immediately evident that you can't actually go as hard as your body is willing to go because of something as silly as my shoulders, hands, and forearms are tired.
Mhm.
And I think that's something a lot of people don't really take into consideration. And how do you help get them to see the benefits of doing the upper body if they haven't like experienced what it's like to physically be strong in the upper body?
Well, to your point, like every single one of those athletes has a story of, yeah, I was doing really well in this race, and then I just couldn't hang on to the bars, or like my shoulders were so sore I couldn't hold myself up. And I'm like, well, why do you think that is? Like, and then the light bulb goes off, like, yeah, okay, you set that trap for me. But but like I kind of meet them where they're at and like explain to them, just what I said earlier. Like if you're doing what you should be doing on the bike, you're not going to be putting on muscle mass. So like I use a story from my own background. In college, I was good enough to get on the team for my event, which was like a triple jump and 400 meter, but I wasn't like I was never going to win conference, certainly wasn't going to the Olympic trials. And so the coaches were like, well, maybe we should like you're pretty good at a lot of things. Like you're pretty explosive, you got decent endurance, decent power. We're going to make you a decathlete, but you need to get a little bit bigger because I was in college about 180 pounds at 6'7". So they set me up with the football strength coach, gave me a special meal pass for the cafeterias, and like I was religious. I was eating like 8,000 calories a day in the gym twice a day, still doing my sport. At the end of 12 weeks, I gained a grand total of 4 pounds of muscle. So, it's really, really hard to put on muscle, as you guys know. Um, and it's just not something that happens by accident. Like, yeah, maybe if I hadn't still been training for the 400 and running as much as I was running, I would have put on a little bit more muscle, but just not that much more. I mean, I just don't, I'm more of a slow twitch athlete, so I just don't have that kind of physiology. And, especially the professionals that if by the time they've gotten to me, like, all right, the horse has left the bar. You are not a strength athlete. You are not a power athlete. Accidentally putting on 10 pounds of muscle isn't in the cards for you.
It's not, I know it's my favorite thing ever. Like having these conversations. It's like, dude, there are people that like focused their entire lives to put 10 pounds of muscle on. You think after burning the amount of calories you burn and running the amount of miles you run, that this is going to accidentally happen by our 220-pound deadlift that we did yesterday? Like, that's
Yeah.
probably out the window for us.
Yeah, and I kind of use like I work backwards with everything. Like when I really started thinking about setting up a strength program for a cyclist, I wanted to look at like, all right, what are the other strength to weight sports in the world, and like who are the strongest athletes in the world pound for pound? And to me, the answer to that is like Olympic lifters, power lifters, because they're pushed, they have the most force generation of any athlete that I know of. So especially in Olympic lifting, they compete in weight classes. And unlike combat sports where they cut weight before a competition, these athletes don't want to cut weight because when you cut weight, you lose strength. So their goals in terms of body composition and training is a lot like a cyclist or an endurance athlete in that they want to be as strong as they can physically be at the weight that they're at without putting on weight. Because if you add weight and have to jump up a weight class, now you got to add 20, 30 pounds to all your lifts if you're already a tip of the spear athlete, that's a huge ask. That doesn't happen overnight. So these athletes train, to get as strong as they humanly can without putting on additional muscle mass. And you guys know, like the way you do that is you lift heavy weights with short reps, long recoveries, because we're really creating that central nervous system response almost as much as anything else to recruit as many muscle fibers as possible for a given task. And when I break it down that way and kind of show them, there is a method to this. I'm not like asking a barber if you need a haircut. Yes, of course you do. Like this, there's a reason for this, and there's a reason we're training this way. And you're gonna get stronger if you train the way I teach you.
And when you're working with these athletes, I think I pulled you off a little bit of this question, just asking the weight question. But the two things that you were talking about is kind of like the core and the upper body.
Mhm.
How are you implementing like training those two things specifically with these riders? Is it still very general? Do you try to get specific? Like what's the kind of approach there?
Yeah, so I approach that from a number of different ways. Like one, using the example of that I brought up in that previous podcast of like doing a leg press versus a squat. The reason you can push so much weight in a leg press is your hips are on a fixed platform and you're able to use the biggest, strongest muscles in your body to move that weight. So like, we can put someone that's untrained in a leg press machine and they can probably press 300 pounds for reps relatively easily. You load that same amount of weight on a barbell in a squat rack, if they can even get it off the rack. If they try to squat that, we both know how that's going to end. It's going to be really bad. So the leg strength isn't the limiter there. They can't support the weight on their shoulders. They don't have the core strength to move under that load. So going back to the bike, we don't have that fixed platform to push from. We have to create that. And we do that through the tension we can maintain in our core. And an extreme example, if you are on your bike and you want to sprint, what do? You get out of the saddle, you grip the handlebars super tight, and you really brace your core so that all of that power is going into the pedals so that there's no wasted motion. Everything's going into the pedals. So we're creating that platform to push from. And most sports are like that. Like you can't have distal strength in your limbs without having proximal strength to put, to create that foundation from, like shooting a cannon from a canoe. You have to have, a stable base to have that strength and that ability to move under a load. So, we do for upper body, I start everybody with like, push-ups and plank pulls, because most of the people when they come to me, they can't do a pull-up. They really struggle with push-ups even in a lot of cases. So I'm just teaching, first of all, I'm teaching them how to move properly under a load so that when we start loading it, they're not just reinforcing bad movement patterns. But we scale, ultimately I want everybody to be able to do a pull-up, at least one, if most of my cyclists can, but like I have some really top level pros that can't do a pull-up and they're winning bike races. and you should be able to do, bang out a few push-ups. And we st like mo again, most of my cyclists can't do when they come to me, they can't do a chest to floor push-up off the floor. So we scale it. We have them start by putting their hands on a bench and working towards the floor. Stairs, like stairs were a great way for me when I kind of got out of my push-up practice and got back into it. I'd do, when I got to 3 sets of 10 on a stair, I'd go down to the next lowest one until I got to the floor. And now I'm reasonably good at push-ups. Um, and the buy-in for that is actually pretty easy because most of these athletes have no background in strength at all. So like for them, doing their first push-up is a big deal. It's a huge accomplishment for them. And they get that feedback so quick. It doesn't take long for most people to get, that are reasonably athletic to get from not being able to do a single push-up to doing, 4, 5, 6, 10 push-ups, relatively quickly if they're diligent with it.
I like how you meet the athlete like where they're at, and I think that's one of the things that's kind of off-putting or scares away maybe a lot of people is that they know in the deep down inside of them that hey, I am weak upper body, and if I just go to a gym and start trying to bench press and I'm trying to bench press with an empty 45-pound bar, like I will be laughed out of the gym. Versus being like, hey, this is where you're at. And the only thing more embarrassing than not being able to do a push-up is still not being able to do a push-up 4 months later.
Right.
Um, and so I think that's a pretty cool approach to meet them where they're at. And you said how you have professionals who can't do a pull-up but win bike races, and acknowledging that like, hey, just because you can do 10 pull-ups doesn't mean you're going to win more bike races. It probably wouldn't hurt. And so I'm guessing you still work with that same athlete to like, hey, maybe eventually they will be able to do a pull-up, but that's not the most important thing in their mind. And so meeting them where they're at's a pretty cool method that I haven't seen taken a lot.
Yeah, and that's why, I'm not a big fan of like having like standards of like everybody should be able to do 20 push-ups, 10 pull-ups, and you should be able to bench press your body weight for 10 reps and do two times body weight squats and deadlifts. I mean, it's great if you can do that stuff. But that's just not realistic for a lot of people. Some people just really, really struggle with pull-ups and or push-ups, or they have a fear of deadlifting heavy. So if I can, my whole thing is I want to get them stronger. So the standard is, what can you do now? Let's improve on that. That's what I look at for standards.
Dude, Tristan, that quote, that was fire. The only thing worse than not being able to do a push-up is still not being able to do a push-up. I fucking
Yeah,
love
that
that
is
one.
great.
That's a
I'm
really good
stealing
one.
that.
Dude's dropping lines on us right now.
Yep.
One of the things that I kind of want to talk to you about, and this is one thing I noticed with my ultra runners, is the psychological confidence that comes from strength training, man. Like it is crazy in so many regards. One, like the even something as simple as like body weight wins, where they're not able to do a push up, to now like showing themselves they're able to do a push up and seeing that growth in their own bodies. But also, what I've noticed, especially in the ultra world, is they all come back and tell me of like, I know that guy's not strength training, and I am. And like in
Yeah.
the nitty gritty of the race, like they talk about thinking about that of like, I've done things they haven't done, and it helps them in the race. And I've never done like a long endurance race like that. But yeah, every single one of them has brought that back to me and has said that like in the middle of the race that that is a thought that has came to their head, or they've seen that and it's like, it's helped them. And man, even if you're going to say like, the physiological benefits there, which I mean is silly. I don't know if anybody's actually saying that, but maybe other cyclists that just don't do it. But that psychological component, man, is something that I just feel like cannot be written off.
Oh yeah, confidence is huge. Like if, there's the Henry Ford quote, the guy who thinks he can do it and the guy who can't thinks he can't do it, they're both right. You got if I see it all the time. Like I have athletes that will like I'm a big fan of doing loaded like farmer carries and suitcase carries, overhead carry. Like all my athletes know at some point in the workout it's gonna, all right, we're gonna go pick up heavy stuff and walk around. And so they'll send me pictures all the time of them like dragging their bike through the airport or carrying big grocery bags and stuff like that. But it's also they see the carryover not only in their sport but just in day-to-day life. My well, using my wife for example, she comes, she trains and does her own thing, and a big thing with her is like she wouldn't go to Costco unless I went with her because we usually go to Costco to get dog food because she's like, I don't like I can barely move those 40-pound bags of dog food. And now she goes to Costco by herself and throws a bag of dog food on her shoulder and walks out of there. And so it's really cool to be a part of that and just see people, have these little wins throughout the day and throughout their life because it does carry over, especially for, my high school athletes. I really preach that you need to really learn to love the process and do everything you can to train the best you can and apply that to other areas of your life. The great thing about sport is, in my opinion, you see the input equals output in such a compressed, condensed way. And once you figure that out, that kind of everything works that way. Like the more time you put into your relationship, the better it's going to be. The more time you put into your career, the better it's going to be. The more time and care you put into your training, the better you're going to be at your sport. And that was something I picked up on early on in my own, you know, training journey, is that yeah, I'm kind of the captain of my own destiny here. Like if I keep working hard and staying injury free, I'm going to get better at this. And then I can actually apply this to my business, to my relationship with my friends and my wife, across the board.
Yeah, but we've gotten too smart for that, dude. It's like
Yeah.
it's for real though. It's like, and I've gotten myself too smart for that thought process for a while. Like I was definitely in that mindset, and everything was like working out with that mindset. And then I was introduced to Instagram and all the social media and all the information and all the right ways to train and all the correct ways to do these things. And like I got so smart that I wasn't fucking working, you know? And I
Yeah.
think a lot of these, I mean, and this is smart in quotations, right? Like, so many of these athletes are so smart. There's so many of these people have so much information that it's like, it's not doing you any good. Like you're avoiding, again, the main things that allow you to use those brains. And again, it's not that the information is bad. It's not that any of this stuff is bad, but man, if it keeps you away from actually doing the work and all of these new coaching cues and all these new coaching exercises, if you don't do the work over a long period of time, and I think a lot of these techniques and thinking and worrying about doing things right or wrong, it keeps you away from that general premise. And saying that general premise makes you sound like a meathead. You know, like
Yeah.
I've said it so many times, and people are like, oh, it's so simple. It's such a meathead. Like it was like it's the truth, you know, like, and you can
Hmm.
add on to the truth and you can do the truth in right and wrong ways. Like, is you can train stupid. That's not to say you can't train stupid, but man, I know a lot of people that train stupid that are a lot more jacked and strong and more successful than a lot of people that train smart in quotations.
No, 100%. And it's like we love to overcomplicate things and make things like, if you believed everything you saw on Instagram, you like think about like what influencers put up for like this is what my rest day protocol is. You have to get up early, you have to get up and do 100 sun salutations, and then you have to journal for a half hour, and then you got to sit in an ice bath. And like, you know what my pros do on their recovery days? Nothing. Like they recover. They're on the couch. They're watching Netflix. They've got the compression legs on. The most strenuous thing, like will walk their dog. Like that's what an actual recovery day looks like.
Yeah, I think that was one thing that took me a second to realize in my own spot was how almost over recovering or thinking about recovery can basically make it stressful of like, oh, I need to drive over here so that I can get a massage, and then I need to go over here so that I can do stim, and then I need to like make sure that I'm setting time away to do Normatex. And it's like in my program this past year, we had a discussion post where we talked about different recovery modalities and stuff. And I said, I think most of the recovery modalities and how they work are basically just sitting down on your butt and getting the time to relax orbit or have any off the bike movements. So have you seen with some of your athletes, like God forbid when they do have a crash, because everybody in that sport eventually goes down one way or the other, that they're able to bounce back a little better?
I have seen that, and I've had a lot of athletes anecdotally tell me like, yeah, I had a really, really hard crash and slammed my shoulder into the ground, and I got up and walked away from it. Like, I don't think I would have done that, 2 years ago before I started strength training. And Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a buzz thing. Like, people talk about injury prevention all the time, but it's like it's really hard to quantify that, and it's hard to, demonstrably show that that's true. But an extreme example I'll use is like I'm a fitness junkie and sports junkie, so I watch the CrossFit Games every year, and I think it's amazing what those athletes can do. But like one year they had a criterium. This was probably 8 or 10 years ago, maybe. And it went about like what you would expect, like if you put a bunch of people who don't race bikes on a crit course, and there were a lot of crashes, but like, and a lot of high side crashes, which you know what it is. You're a cyclist, like the worst type of possible crash, like that is almost always going to break a collarbone. But there were a lot of those, like, and every single one of those athletes, male and female, got up and walked away from that. If those same crashes happen with like untrained like a regular cyclist, skinny cyclist, most of those would have been like separated shoulder at best, broken collarbone or scapula at worst. So there's definitely something to the durability. I mean, that's an extreme example. Like a professional CrossFitter looks very, very different than a professional cyclist. So of course, like that additional muscle mass that they have is going to provide some injury protection. But to me, the biggest injury protection that you see through strength training is you tend to get fewer overuse injuries. So a lot of overuse injuries, like knee and like plantar fasciitis, things like that, are because the prime movers are fatiguing, and you have something that's doing like knee extension that isn't primarily a knee extensor. You're using other muscles to do things that they normally wouldn't do. So like your adductor, is it the sartorius? I'm pretty bad with my anatomy. Like that's one that cramps on me a lot. That's, it can be a knee extensor, but it's really not. It's not supposed to be. So that's what strength training gives you, is your prime movers are going to last longer, and you're not going to be relying on recruiting other muscle groups that can kind of do your primary movement there, but they're not really designed. They have other functions that they're better at.
That makes a lot of sense. Another question I had is in terms of mobility, and that's a pretty broad word. But I know, especially in some of these longer races, being able to hold a position for 9 hours requires an incredible amount of strength, but in spite of just strength, you also need to be pretty flexible to like actually just get into this position to start. Do you work with any of these athletes on off the bike mobility stuff, or do you sprinkle the mobility into the strength training, or is that something that it's kind of taken care of on its own by someone else?
Like all the pros that I work with, they have a pretty dedicated mobility practice that they had prior to working with me. So for the most part, I don't do a lot with them because it's already established, and I'm kind of a if it's not broke, don't fix it type of person. But I also find that a lot of mobility issues are really strength issues at their core. Your body's response to, like, if you don't have control over a range of motion, is just say, well, we're not going to give you that range of motion because you can't handle it. So for example, like I'm not a very flexible person. Like I can't touch my toes, but I can get down into a full Asian squat and hang out there comfortably for, 10 or 15 minutes. So to me, the difference between mobility and mobility is you can get in the positions that you need to be in for your sport and operate effectively in that, versus flexibility is, to me, a little more like, touching your toes or doing the splits or whatever it happens to be. Mobility is more important in my mind than just absolute flexibility. Like I've seen more injuries with people that are hypermobile than people that are a little on the stiffer side of things.
Yeah, that's a good, I think, good definition because I mean everyone likes to say like, oh, I'm working on mobility and then do 5 minutes twice a week of trying to touch their toes or stretching their back or something versus the letting the sport tell you where your rate limiting step lies. Like, hey, if you can't be in this position and you need to be in that position, then it's something we need to work on versus, like you just said, not being able to touch your toes. If that's something that doesn't particularly matter to you, but you can do everything else, why spend the time necessarily to have to work on that just to work on it?
Right. And that's, I think some people are just like anything, like I've ne like even as a kid, I couldn't touch my toes. Like I've never been like a super flexible person. I've always been on the stiffer side of things, but it's not, I do work on it. I do stretch and I do mobility drills, but like the thing that's helped me the most is like just being able to act, to do a full range of motion goblet squat. And a lot of the athletes when I first start working with them, they really can't do a full range of motion squat. Like they can get to maybe about parallel before their back starts to round or they get, the butt wink or whatever. But as they get stronger and start pushing that range, now they can get lower and they have control over that range of motion. And almost, everybody that sticks with me and works with me for, 1 or 2 seasons will they can do a full range of motion squat after a while. But they didn't start that way, and they didn't get that way just by stretching. It was by actually getting strong in that movement and in that range of motion.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a good way to put it. One last question for you here. What do you think of the future of strength training in endurance sports begins to look like? Do you think it's going to start to catch on more as obviously, like most sports and most industries, there's more research, there's more technology, there's more social media, and there's more eyes on it. I think there's more opportunities, like you said, with the Nino Schurter video in 2015. There's videos like that coming out all the time now because of social media. Do you see it being adopted more by everyone in that in those endurance communities, or do you see it still kind of being a niche that the professionals will probably work on it, but maybe a majority of the amateurs or just under professionals still continue to ignore?
No, I think it's getting more and more mainstream. To your point, I just watched a video last night of Jakob Ingebrigtsen's strength training routine. Um, that would have been unheard of 10 years ago for a world-class 1500-meter runner to be spending time in the gym. And he had a pretty legit strength program. I don't know if he came up with it on his own or if I'm assuming he has coaches. Um, but I know like I think the strength training's kind of always been there to like that. My theory was kind of proven correct in that like I've always been kind of associated with the mountain bike world, and I kind of knew that a lot of the top World Cup mountain bike racers were doing some gym stuff, but they just weren't talking about it. And then Nino started talking about it, and then you start finding out, oh yeah, a lot of these guys and girls have been doing this for a long time. They just haven't made a big deal about it. Um, and I think that it definitely trickles down. Masters racers are, they all want like an edge. The competitive. So they're going to do what, they're the one they've spent $15,000 on their new S Works or whatever the top of the line bike that they have is. They have a coach, they have a nutritionist. They're going to start strength training because they see the top people are doing it. And, on the gravel side and the off-road side of things, it's already there. Like the top people are all doing it. But I also know that the World Tour teams, like the Tour de France type riders, are doing more strength training than you'd think. Not all of them, but a lot of like, I know Pogacar is in the gym. I know Remco lifts, like all those guys are doing something.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end it right there because it shows that regardless of the sport, there's still strength training required. And I think the opposite also holds true is that a lot of these strength sports, they don't necessarily think that endurance training would matter for them. And I think it would almost be the exact opposite for some of these strength sports of like, hey, you almost do zero endurance training and you're so strong. If you just spent a little less time doing your sport and a little bit more doing some aerobic training and built up a little bit of a base, I think you could fit in a lot more powerful and beneficial training into your schedule than just your current strength training with minimal sacrifice.
Oh, 100%. I mean, basic physiology tells us that all of our recovery mechanisms are aerobically based. So even if you're a power lifter whose event lasts 3 seconds, the recovery between those efforts is aerobic. And so, like, I wear this kind of ironically lift heavy, ride fast. Like lifting heavy for a cyclist, as we talked about, is not the same as lifting heavy for a power lifter or a CrossFit athlete. And I think the strength athletes kind of took that in context with their endurance stuff. Like, yeah, a power lifter doesn't need to be training 10 hours a week, on a bike or running to be good at his sport, but like find out what that threshold is for them to get better. And that's kind of what I would do with my athletes. Like, yeah, this is heavy for you, but it's not heavy in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and that when you talked about CrossFit earlier, I actually have a friend who was pretty high up in the CrossFit Games rankings for a while, and we did a presentation earlier this year on endurance training for just different populations, and it was like, hey, this CrossFit athlete, he's probably in the 99 percentile for absolute like strength, but also for aerobic capacity is insane. And I think it went on to show that, hey, just because, you can deadlift, over 600 pounds, you can squat an incredible amount. He was also running like a 5:02 mile and an 18-minute 5K, which most people who are just normal would struggle to hit that, let alone be able to hit that while weighing, over 200 pounds, able to squat 500 plus, bench an insane amount, and do all these other attributes. And so finding what matters for you in the middle ground, I think is pretty important.
Yeah, I mean, look at Rich Froning at Leadville. He's gone. I think he's gone under 8 hours, which is really, really fast for, he's not a small guy. And it's just a testament to the work capacity that those athletes have. I mean, it's really incredible.
All right, well, I think that wraps it up. And everyone, thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. Join us next week as we dive down another rabbit hole. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star rating. Follow us on Instagram at Austin Yoakum to stay updated on future podcast guests. Keep chopping wood.